Well, here we are, session number 7 of Micah, looking at chapter 3. We've moved past the first 2 chapters, past the first oracle, moving into the first oracle, and the call to listen and the indictment charges will occur in chapter 3. There are 12 verses in chapter 3, and they break nicely into 3 4-verse sets. So that's the way we're going to go. Each of these sessions may be a little bit shorter than typical lately. It seems like we've been running 40 to 50 minutes lately, and this may stick around the half-hour mark, or maybe the half-hour mark maximum. But anyhow, let's move into Micah's second oracle, one in which he begins as before with a call to listen. A call to listen to the charges with which the ruling elite, government operatives, priests, and false prophets are to be indicted. We'll follow the charges with the charges of the indictment after we get through these first few verses. That will take us through the first 12 verses of chapter 3, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is actually all of chapter 3. Then chapters 4 and 5 will bring the good news of hope, the third aspect of each oracle. And only instead of taking 2 verses to cover it, we will take 2 chapters to cover it. So you know that Micah is going to get into a lot of more details supporting the idea that in the long run, Israel is going to be back on God's side. So, 2 chapters instead of 2 verses. That's the plan. So now, let's go ahead and get on with it. So, that's the plan. It's a sober, rhetorical question that we begin this call, the call to listen. And this is, again, the call for the second oracle of Micah, second of 3. So we're looking at Micah 3, verse 1. And I said, and this is Micah talking now, of course, hear now, heads of Jacob, and rulers of the house of Israel. Now, those 2 statements are the same, really. Heads of Jacob means the rulers of, in this case, primarily Judah, although he's speaking more of Israel as being a combined nation. He's not separating them out explicitly for the most part. Rulers of the house of Israel, again, Jacob is just another name for the nation Israel, not the split nation, but the unified nation. So you got heads of that nation and house of that nation. And of course, when he talks about rulers of that house, that's the same as the heads of Jacob. So I'm going on just to remind you that poets in Hebrew use a lot of parallelism. They'll give you 2 consecutive statements that are either virtually identical in meaning or possibly contrasting instead of exactly the same. They'll actually be 2 contrasting statements, opposites if you mean. And there's a third one that we'll go to when we get there. And here's his rhetorical question. Is it not for you, you heads of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, isn't for you to know justice? That's a kind of actually a very sarcastic statement. Of course, if you're ruling over a nation as king or whatever, governors, whatever, obviously one of your major tasks is to ensure that there is justice, fairness under the law. And so he's saying, isn't it natural for you to know justice? Shouldn't you? What's going on? And he's going to now explain a bit. Again, the assumed answer is yes, obviously. These are the people who have to know justice in order to carry out justice. Amos had a similar plea that he made to the northern kingdom. Let's look at that in Amos 5, verse 15. Here's Amos. Remember now, Amos is a boy from Judah, a good old boy from Judah, from the south, in the north, in their face about judgment that's coming. I don't think I'd have liked Amos's job, although he handled it pretty well. Hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. Perhaps Yahweh, your God of hosts, may be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. And now, Joseph is a synonym for the northern kingdom. So Amos is speaking only to the northern kingdom. But he said, makes sense, guys. You're to hate evil. You're to love good. You are God too, of course. You're to establish. I get some of these words and contract them just a bit. Establish justice. And maybe if you do that, he's saying, Yahweh will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. And again, remnant is not something you see much in the New Testament, because we don't speak of the remnant of the saved, because all saved are part of the remnant of saved. But in Israel, there were many who were not true sons of Abraham. And so there were many in Israel that were not faithful to Jehovah, were not faithful to the law. And so the remnant of Joseph consists not of all of them, all Israelites, but only those Israelites who were faithful to Yahweh. By the way, we have a similar deal in the church. It'll come up again later. For example, we speak of the church. But when we speak of the church, we ought to be speaking of the visible church and the invisible church. What do I mean by those? Well, some of you know what I mean, but I'll explain it again. The visible church consists of all those people who claim to be saved and are members of a physical church somewhere, somehow. But we also know that in every congregation, at least every one I've ever seen, there will be those who claim to be saved among a congregation who in fact are not members or saved. They're members of the church maybe, but they're lying, because to be a member of the church, you supposedly have made a profession of faith and are in fact saved. But there are many in the congregations, plural, physical, in the world today who are not saved. They're wannabes, make-believes, whatever term you want to talk about. So out of those congregations, and by the way, that just means that the church is a perfect example of what Christ spoke in a parable when he spoke about the wheat and the tares. Remember what he said? Don't worry about the tares now. Don't try and yank them out because you may harm some of the wheat. Tares, of course, are the make-believers, and the wheat is the true believers. So he said, when it comes to harvest time, we will separate wannabes from true. So the invisible church consists of those who are in fact true believers. So that's what we're at here a bit. One suspects the question was posed because the audience was not acting as though they believed and acted according to justice, social justice in this particular case. Now, we know there are some aspects of Christianity that have gone overboard, and social justice is their only concern, or their primary concern, when it ought not to be social justice, which it should be concerned with, but the true concern is over the salvation of those in the congregation and elsewhere. So let's look at the indictment as Micah gets into it now. So he's already made the call. Let's go on in verse 2 and 3. You who hate good and love evil. In other words, you guys that have got things backwards. Remember Isaiah somewhere speaks about those who, in their ruling, rule in favor of evil and against justice. He says what Isaiah calls, you got things backwards. You're treating things that are evil as if they're good. The things that are good, you're messing around with as if they are the evil. And you're going after what is good, saying that it is evil. But what about those who have this backwards? They hate good and love evil instead of vice versa. Micah goes on to make the charge. Who tear off their skin from them. And that's, I assume, referring to the good. But I think in this case it probably goes beyond that. In other words, he says, you who have it backwards in terms of how you're looking at maintaining justice, you got evil and love backwards. You're effectively, and here's his description to it in metaphorical terms, who tear off the skin of those people and their flesh from their bones. So it's as if this is an animal, or maybe it's somebody who's just hunted down an animal. You look at that thing called an animal in this case, or what Micah is saying is really the people. You're looking at them and you're doing as if you're preparing to eat the flesh. You're ripping the skin off and you're tearing off the flesh. You're taking both flesh and skin off. So what is the left? Bones, innards, blood. And verse 3, and who eat the flesh of my people, which is another way of saying what? Whatever you're doing to my people that's got good and evil backwards is equivalent to say, I'm going to eat your flesh. Translation to Horner translation, anyhow, you're bilking them of everything you can. You're making yourself rich by stealing. You're just simply taking everything from them that they have. You're stripping off their skin from them. You're breaking their bones. And listen to this. You chop them the bones up. As for the pot, as meat in the kettle. So what's he saying? you've got these people, you're chewing them up so badly. What you're doing, even the bones you're chopping up, putting it in the pot, you're making a stew. So it's the idea that these people are feasting on everything they can from the people they're supposed to be helping, maintaining justice. They're doing everything backwards for personal gain. Who's going to eat this? The one doing the stripping, of course. Micah doesn't worry about being delicate, does he? He set up the image of either one beast killing and eating another beast, or one person slaughtering an animal and butchering it in terms or in anticipation of a meal of meat and bones in a stew. So either way, what you have is a predator feasting on the victim. And in this case, it's the leaders of the government, the rulers, who are feasting on the people they're supposed to be guiding into a safe, just, fair way of life. Either way, it's gruesome, no matter how you look at it. Stripping the skin and hide off the carcass, breaking the bones, chopping the bones up into bits for eating, or for at least for the stew pot. Those who cook stews and such are used to the idea of a bone in the pot to add extra flavor from the marrow and so forth. The savagery, of course, is on purpose, and it's aimed at the illegal, evil oppression of the poor and vulnerable by those in charge. Those who have the governmental backing, who have authority to do what they do, although what they do is not what their authority is set for, but they're doing it anyhow. So that's the picture that we have. The ruling class feasting on the lower class. Now, if you go back into the first oracle, and this is the thing you're going to see in Micah, he repeats some things in different terms quite frequently. He spoke to the sins of the people, and it was great enough to warrant punishment under the covenant's curse clause. And there, of course, I'm referring to Deuteronomy 28, where Moses said, if you guys keep the commandments of the covenant, the Sinai covenant, then you will be blessed by Yahweh, coming, going, no matter where you are, no matter what you do, no matter what you have, everything will be blessing. But then he adds, if you do not obey the covenant's requirements, then you will be cursed by Yahweh. Don't ever forget it. It is a curse. It's not just bad-mouthing. It was a curse. It said, I'm going to curse you coming, going, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you have, it's all cursed and will be cursed until you return to me under the provisions of the covenant. So Micah's saying, you guys know this, but let me go on. Micah begins a tirade against the ruling body of the nations, and again, it's for violating the ethical elements of the covenant's law, or of the covenant itself. And all judgments that you find of the nations after Sinai, all the violations that are mentioned are violations of the covenant's requirements. So this is where we are in this. So let me remind you of what Micah told us earlier about this evil. In Micah 2, the first two verses of Micah 2, he said he had written this, and we've read it, so you'll recall it. Woe to those who scheme iniquity, who work out evil on their beds. So this is intentional, it's planned, what they're doing. When morning comes, they do it. So you plan it, then you do it. For it is in the power of their hands, and these are the people who have that authority to back up what they're doing. At least that's what they'll claim. Verse 2, they covet fields and then seize them. He looks at it like, this is like Ahab was with the vineyard, right? Oh, Jezebel, see that vineyard? I want it, but he won't sell it to me. So what does Jezebel do? Finds a way to get the guy killed by execution for breaking the law and goes and takes the field. They covet fields and then seize them, using the cover of the legal power they have. And houses, and they take them away. They rob a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. Remember, his inheritance from God was the land that's in his clan's name as given by God. Actually, the land still belonged to God, but each section of each clan had lot of land assigned to them. And so what you're saying here is these guys aren't paying any attention to the assignments God made. They'll go in and take it for personal gain. The list of vices that we're going to see: bribery, fraud, theft, oppression, bloodshed. That's a pretty hefty list right there. So that's what you see Micah telling us comes from these rulers, all those things. Let me read for you Deuteronomy 16, verse 19. Talking to leaders again. And this is Yahweh speaking. You shall not distort justice. You shall not be partial. You shall not take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise. In other words, even if somebody knows better, a big enough bribe in front of them, and their covetousness, their greed will override what they know to be proper. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. So bribery can get to almost anyone, it's saying. So these are the people we're going to be focusing on during this indictment. And the first people we'll begin with will be those who are of the ruling class. I'm separating them out from the religious leaders. These guys had one significant charge: see to the application of the social ethics of the covenant in a fair, righteous, and just manner. Let me read that again. One task of the ruler. There were actually two. Protection from enemies would have been included, but locally within the nation, the rulers have one specific and significant charge. See to the application of the social ethics of the covenant. See to the application of the laws of the covenant in a fair, righteous, and just manner. As a matter of fact, that's going to be later. I'm trying to remember, I think it's in chapter 5 when we get there. One of the most memorable comments that people have seen from Micah, where Micah answers the question, what does God expect of you? And it's a little 3-step charge. The charge in this indictment at least, centers on the ruler's failure at their one primary assignment, seeking fairness under the law of the covenant, and fairness for every member of the covenant community. The eating is a reference to self-aggrandizement. I have to say that very carefully. You know me in multi-syllable words. So it's a reference to enriching yourself, doing what gains for you personally, and then self-enriching yourself. Self-enriching yourself. Well, a little redundant there. Self-enriching at the expense of the poor, vulnerable peoples of the nation. And usually, that's who takes it in the shorts. People who have no way to prevent it, no power, no influence. So the rulers had everything backwards. They're to serve the people by a fair, just administering of the covenant law. They were not to abuse them for personal gain, but they were abusing the people for personal gain, and they were not fairly administering the law of the covenant. They were there to serve, not to take. But of course, they got it backwards again. They were taking and not serving. But prayers for blessings, forget it. Look at Micah 3:4. Then they will cry out to the Lord. But, and now, so we're talking about prayer, right? The rulers are doing this. At some point, they're going to cry out to the Lord. But he will not answer them. What has Micah just told these rulers? Because of what you are doing, you can kiss off God's answering and supporting your prayers. Instead, God will hide his face from them, or if he's talking to them directly, God will hide his face from you at that time. Now remember, what was a major blessing you could ask on a Jew? May God shine his face on you. Micah says, God's face is not going to shine on you. He will hide it. He will turn his face from you. Why? Because he can't tolerate this kind of behavior. Remember on the cross? God turned his face away from his Son, Jesus Christ, because the sin of the world, your sin, my sin, had been dumped on him. He was now pure sin, and God couldn't look at him. God turned his face away. Christ knew that. That's why he said, Father, why have you forsaken? Actually, he didn't say Father, did he? At that time, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And why did God do that? Because Christ was, for that moment, sin. Why would God turn his face away from these rulers? The last part of Micah 3:4, because they have practiced evil deeds. Remember, God does not take kindly to anyone who abuses his people. When push comes to shove, when judgment arises, those guys will get no respect from God. They'll get no response from God in their cries for relief. When judgment comes, those guys can expect no help or relief from God. God's face being turned away again implies there will be no relief, no blessings. You will feel every ounce of pain and suffering that comes your way during judgment. Their consistent violation of the ethics. What ethics? The ethics required under the covenant will cost them any hope of favor from Yahweh. We tend to forget that God has, as one of his attributes, perfect justice. Look at what is spoken about this sort of thing in the Old Testament and in the New Testament for that matter. Proverbs 1:28. Then they will call on me, that's Yahweh, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they shall not find me. Will God intentionally turn his face away from evil? Absolutely. Psalm 18, verse 41. Psalm 18:41. They cried for help, but there was none to save, even to Yahweh, but he did not answer them. And in both those cases, you're speaking about people doing evil. You're doing evil, don't expect help from God at the process. How do you get to where you can expect help from God? Repent, turn, and go back to him. Now, rulers in Israel, what were they to be? Shepherds. That's been one of the principal Old Testament metaphors of leadership. You're to be a shepherd, meaning you lead, you guide, you provide for, you protect. Let's look at 2 Samuel 5:2. 2 Samuel. This is in David's time. 2 Samuel 5:2. And Samuel here is speaking to David. He says, previously, when Saul was a king over us, you, David, were the one who led Israel out and in. In other words, he said, Saul was a king, David, but you were really the leader at that time. And Yahweh said to you, David, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel. This is when Samuel was telling David, you're going to be the king. You aren't now. That's still Saul. But he said, one day you will be the king of Israel. You will be the shepherd of the people as you rule. Excuse me. And then down to 2 Samuel 7:7. And I guess you should go back to where we just were. Would the idea of a shepherd been new to David? Well, remember all of his youth days right up to the day when he killed Goliath, and even beyond, David was a shepherd of his father's sheep. 2 Samuel 7:7, just a little bit further on in Samuel. And this is Yahweh speaking to those returned from Babylonian captivity. So this is a long time after Micah. Because now Micah is probably 150 years or so before Yeah, probably 150 years before Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and took the people captive. So this is long after that. I'm sorry. I said this is a long time before that, because David was king, and Micah, of course, is after the split of the kingdom into two. So I'll get myself oriented in history again. So this is back hundreds of years earlier, when the Jews, and they were called Jews and by some at some times, after the captivity from Babylon. So he's speaking to people who have come back to Israel's land after being released from Babylon. And this is God speaking to them. Wherever I have gone with all the sons of Israel, so that's who he's speaking to. Did I speak a word with one of the tribes of Israel, which I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? God is saying, after he got back, he said, I haven't, all this time, since Sinai, since the Exodus, I've never asked anyone to shepherd my people Israel. And of course, I think what he's getting at there is, I was to be your king, I was to be your shepherd, and I never insisted on you building me a temple. Now, they did have, during the wilderness wanderings and beyond, they did have the tabernacle, but not a permanent physical building. So he said, you want a king? Why? Haven't I taken care of you without requiring lots? I didn't require any one person to take responsibility for you as king. That was your idea. I haven't told anyone to build a temple. What's going on? Why are you doing what you're doing and not doing what you're not doing? Because now they're back. They'd had a temple. It wasn't commanded by God. It was something David wanted to do. And it's one that God said, no, David, you can't do it because you're a warrior. You're a man of blood. Your son I will allow to do it, and who give him instructions, so forth. So God said, all these things were your own choices, not mine. I would have taken care of you as a shepherd, and a shepherd king would take care of you. But now, of course, he has told David that, David, you are going to be a shepherd king. Well, I get stuck on there all night if I don't get off of it. David was the epitome of a shepherd leader. And he had been, as we mentioned a while ago, he'd been a shepherd all the days of his youth. And he actually returned to shepherding even after killing Goliath, in which he was famous. He was a victor. He was a hero. He was, of course, that's why Saul wanted to kill him, because, his fame exceeded Saul's own fame. If we look in 1 Samuel 17:15, but it supports what I just said. But David went back and forth from Saul, and this is after killing Goliath, to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. The psalmist knew how things were supposed to be. Let's look at Psalm 97:10. And again, it's the same sort of thing that we've been hearing in other verses. Hate evil, you who love the Lord, who preserves the souls of his godly ones. He delivers them from the hands of the wicked. Says, if you love the Lord and hate evil, God will be your shepherd king and will lead you out of the hand of the wicked. And in Psalm 119:63, I hate and despise falsehood, but I love thy law. I believe this was David speaking, saying, everything that's false and evil, I hate it, I despise it, but I love your law, Lord. This leads you to a question. Is it unchristian to hate anything? Well, I'll leave you with David. Anyhow, that is the way that leaders who rule were to be. You were to rule by hating evil and doing good, shepherds of your people. Next time, the next 4 verses, that'll be what, 5 through 8. We'll look at a new set of those who are charged under this rather lengthy indictment. We'll see you then. Thank you.